welcome everyone. If you are a fan of 1e4 opening, you are in for a treat. Today, I have got you covered 4 must-know opening traps in 1e4. In this video, you will be learning how you can take advantage, use the strategies and trick your opponent to win fast. Stay tuned till the end because this video is going to be interesting. Let's get started. So, we play 1 e4, the opponent responds symmetrically with e5, then we can play a knight to f3. Now, this is the normal move, right? Here, most of the players do play their knight to c6. We will be looking at this first game with knight c6. After knight c6, you play a pawn to c3. Now, a simple idea behind pawn c3 is to develop your pawn to d4 and attack in the center. Your opponent does ignore it and plays knight to f6. You go immediately for pawn d4. Now, this pawn on e4 is hanging. It is perfectly sound move. Also for black, this is not too dangerous because here he can either capture on the e4 square with his knight, which is fine. He can also play his pawn to d5 to defend this. In the game, the black player captured on the e4 square with his knight. Now you want to capture this pawn back, but the knight is defending it. So what we can do, just push your pawn up on the d5 square. Knight is in danger, he'll move back and now you can capture the pawn. So materially, it looks okay. For both the sides, material is fine, right? But development wise, white is doing much more better because look at these diagonals, they are blocked. The queen cannot come out, the bishop cannot come out. And king is not ready to castle. Well, your pieces are well placed, at least in the center. Here, if black plays his knight to g6, trying to open up the diagonals for the queen and the bishop, you can go with your bishop to d3 here. He is giving an attack to your knight, you are also giving an attack to his knight. At first, black might think that you did a mistake by playing to bishop d3 because he can simply go with his knight to f2, fork your queen as well as the rook. Now, if you capture the knight over here, he is going to capture it back and then he is going to be a pawn up in this position. Also, he has distracted your castle. But as white, you have to be smart. Don't need to immediately recapture the knight on the f2 square. Instead, you can sacrifice the queen. What we can do is just capture the knight on the g6 square with your bishop. If he gets greedy and captures your queen, well, that's a full disaster for black because it is going to be a checkmate in just few moves. How? Just play the bishop to f7, give a check. The king can't capture the bishop, the knight defends it. So he has to come on the e7 square and then comes in bishop g5 check. Only option for the king is to come up on the d6 square and then you give him another check. Just chase him till death. Play your knight to c4, give a check. The only option king has is to go on the c5 square. Now your knight is in danger. Instead of going and capturing the queen directly, which you are winning at any point of time, you should look for a checkmate because the king is in the center. So we want to take advantage of it. What we can do is just play this knight to a3 move. Now knight on a3 not only protects the knight on the c4 square, but also takes control of the b5 square. Now, if you look closely, the king is already trapped. He cannot go anywhere. He cannot capture this because of the bishop. Cannot go to any of these two squares because of the knight. The pawn controls the c6 square. These two squares are also controlled by your pawn. So, the king is completely trapped. What you need to do is, you just need to play your pawn to b4 and that will be a checkmate. Now, black here realized that pawn b4 would be a checkmate. So, what he did is, he just captured the pawn on b2 square. But that was not the only way that we could give a checkmate, right? There's one more move. Can you find that move? Pause the video to find the move. Well, I am confident that you guys might have got this bishop to e3 move. Bishop e3 is a checkmate. The king was already trapped. And see how beautifully you have sacrificed the queen, but these three pieces are giving a checkmate. Not only so, this is how you can win with these three minor pieces in the open. Now coming back to game number 2. In the last game, what we have seen was how we are taking advantage of the f7 square. Now notice one thing, that pawn on f7 and f2 are considered as the weakest squares in white as well as the black's camp. Why are those weakest? Because they are only guarded by the king. And none of the other piece protects that pawn. That's why they are considered as the weakest square. Now we should always try to exploit the weakness. We should always try to take advantage of the opponent's weakest square. That's what white did in the last game. He took advantage of that weak f7 square, sacrificed the queen and then captured on f7 with the bishop, right? Just like that, every time you play as white, you should be always careful that how you can take advantage of the f7 square. Now coming back to game number 2, trap number 2. e4, e5, we play a knight to f3, and now here when black plays his knight to f6, this is the Russian game or the Petrov defense. Here Usual moves are to either play a pawn to d3, capture on the e5 square, or play knight c3. Anything is fine. But as white, you can do an unusual move. If you are one e4 opening player and you play knight f3, someone plays their knight to f6, then you can do this unusual move, which is perfectly sound move. You can go with your bishop to c4. Bishop c4, again the same thing, attacking on the f7 square. Taking advantage of the weakness. Sooner or later, we are going to prepare our knight on the g5 square and target this. Here, if black captures on the e4 square, we are playing in the gambit style completely. We have sacrificed our pawn on the e4 square. Right now, going on the g5 square is not possible because the queen and the knight, both the pieces are attacking it. Since this game is in the gambit style, you can play your knight to c3. When he captures, you capture it back with the d pawn. Now look at these pieces. You are ready to jump in on the d5 square, give an attack on the f7 square, your knight and the bishop is developed, the king is ready to castle, and what black has moved is just a pawn. Even though we are a pawn down here, but that doesn't affect us because we are ahead and we are much more ahead in development. So it's completely okay. Here the right move, the right continuation for black is to play the pawn to f6. But f6 looks a little awkward move because it opens up the diagonal for this bishop. Then you're not allowed to castle very soon. Also, we never try to develop the pieces on the flank side or especially on that side where you want to castle. You always try to protect it or play the pieces towards the center. So usual looking move here is to play pawn d6. But d6 is a slightly error move here because now you can immediately strike in by playing your knight to g5. Now the idea behind knight g5 is to give an attack on the f7. It is almost impossible to defend that f7 square. Here what black tried to do is he played his bishop to e6. Now you capture the bishop, he captures it back, and instead of immediately capturing on the e6 square with the knight, what white did here is play the queen to f3 square. Now idea behind queen f3 is simple, attacking the weak f7 square as well as this time attacking the b7 square. Now f7 will be a checkmate, so black defended it by playing his queen to d7. And here you go in to capture the rook. Capture the pawn on the b7 square, attacking the rook. Black might think that he is winning, he is not lose. Black might think that he is able to control this by playing the queen to c6. You cannot capture since it's an x-ray attack. But we have another plan. So what we can do is we can play our queen to c8, give a check. Only option for the king is to go on e7. And now queen e6, king d8 and knight f7 is a fantastic checkmating pattern. So that's how, instead of looking for the obvious moves, instead of going for those greedy pawn captures, what you can do is you can try to attack your opponent first. Again, the second game gives an example how you can exploit the weakness on the f7 square. So now coming back to third game and third trap. After e4, e5, knight f3, what if the opponent does play his pawn to d6? We have seen what happens after knight f6. We have seen what happens after knight to c6. Now let's see what if he plays pawn to d6 here. Pawn d6, you can play a pawn to d4. Now this is the Philidor opening. You might have seen this trap before, but this is very interesting. So after d4, he can capture, you can recapture it with the pawn. Instead, he went with his knight to d7. When you capture on the e5 square, he wanted to defend it with the knight. That's when black went with his knight to d7. You can go normally, play a bishop to c4. Here, black plays his bishop to e7. Again a mistake because he is now trying to stop this g5 knight jumping in and going on the f7 square. Two of his pieces are defending that square. Only bishop is protecting it. This is again a slight error because now you can first capture on the e5 square. When he recaptures it, you can go with your queen to d5. Now queen d5 aims directly on this weakness, the f7 square. There's no way he can defend it. If he tries to defend it with his knight to h6, then you capture it. He cannot recapture it because it is going to be a checkmate. If he castles here, you are already a piece up and you do not need to worry about it. Okay. So let's see what happened in the game. He played his knight to b6. Now, idea behind knight b6 is to attack the queen and also create some escape room for this king. You go with your queen to f7, give a check, the king comes on the d7 square and now jumps in the knight. You play a knight to e5, give another check. The king has not much options but to go on d6. After king d6, now we can go normally, develop a piece, play on knight to d3. The idea behind that is to push the pawn up and try for a checkmate. Here, if black thinks that he can get rid of one of the attackers, the bishop on, well, then he has ignored the queen on d5 square second time, because this time queen d5 is a checkmate. He has ignored queen d5 few moves back, and again on the d5 square you are giving a checkmate using the same queen. So this is trap number 3. So now coming to trap number 4, game number 4. After e4, e5, instead of going with knight f3, play the bishop's opening. You play a bishop to c4. Here if opponent plays knight f6, which looks a normal move, knight f6, knight c6, both are fine in the bishop's opening. When he places knight to f6, you play a knight to c3. Now if he captures the pawn on the e4 square, thinking when you recapture it, he can give you a fork, and he has not lost a piece, instead he is getting it back with this fork. But we don't need to do that. We don't need to capture it. Here white has an interesting idea in the bishop's opening. Instead of capturing directly on the e4 square, you can go with your queen to h5. Queen h5 is again taking advantage of the weakness on the f7 square, attacking the f7 square. Here if he defends that threat, he doesn't capture knight on the c3 square, instead he goes back with the knight on d6, protecting the f7 square. You continue with the development. Instead of capturing the pawn, free pawn over here, you continue the development and you first save your bishop on the c4 square. When he places bishop to e7 ready to castle, you play a pawn to d3. Finalizing the development. We are not in a hurry to capture this and give an extra tempo for opponent, because after queen e5, he can place knight to c6, getting some tempo, getting some chances to develop. We don't want to do that. We want to take advantage right away by doing the forcing moves. We are finalizing our development by playing our pawn to d3. Here if he castles, now you can play your knight to f3. After knight c6, you go knight to g5. Knight g5 is aiming for a checkmate on the h7 square. If he captures your knight with his bishop, then you can capture it back. The queen is in danger. He needs to move the queen on the e8 square. That's the only option, and now comes knight d5. Attacking this and taking advantage, also trying to go on the f6 square. So well, he is not capturing on the g5 square. He would not do that. Instead, he can play his pawn to h6, attacking the knight directly. Here, we don't need to worry about anything. We do not need to come back with a knight. Instead, go bold, play a pawn to h4, sacrifice the knight. Because now, if he captures your knight on the g5 square, and this checkmate is inevitable, he cannot stop the checkmate. Well, he won't do that. Instead, what can he do? He can try to defend the checkmate by bringing the knight back on the original square, by bringing knight on f6, by going with his knight to e8 square. Here when he goes with knight to e8, you can go with knight to d5. Now when he comes, you are aiming for an exchange. Not only that, you are adding some more pieces in the game. When he places knight to f6, you don't need to capture the knight on f6 immediately. Instead, you can do a fantastic variation. Go queen g6, sacrifice the queen. Here at first it looks that if he captures the queen, which is a free queen, also this check after the exchange, this checkmate is unstoppable on the h7 square. So if he captures the queen, then can you find the checkmate in 2 moves over here? Pause the video, find the move, and then see if you are correct or not. The correct answer here is to play your knight to e7. Give a check. It's a double check. The king has to escape. Only square is to go on the h8 square. And then knight g6 is a beautiful checkmate. So these were the 4 games and 4 amazing traps that you should know if you are 1e4 player. I hope you found the ideas, strategies and everything worthy of applying in your games. For more such tricks and traps, stay tuned with us. Please hit the like button, share with your friends, and I'll see you again in the next video. Thank you.